What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily. So right now, there are two different versions of the Samsung Galaxy A52 on the market. And depending on a lot of different factors, like where you live, what network you're on, what you want out of your phone, you might be deciding between both of them. If you are, I think it's important to understand the differences between these two phones. There's a few things that do actually set them apart, so that hopefully you can make an informed decision and, most importantly, understand which device you're actually looking at and which one you might end up getting. And that's exactly what we're going to do in this video. I'm going to explain what's really different between these two phones. I'll talk about whether or not those differences are worth it, and hopefully this clears up any confusion you might have and helps you decide if either one of these phones is right for you. So to start off, let's just outline which devices we're actually talking about. Now, there's the regular international version of the A52, and then there's the 5G version of the A52, explicitly called the A52 5G, with a different model number, different specs, and some different features. If you're in the US, you'll most likely see the A52 5G on sale, both unlocked direct from Samsung and through some US networks like AT&T and T-Mobile, and even some prepaid carriers too, like Metro. Around the world, in Europe and Asia, the regular A52 is more widely available and sold, but the 5G version pops up too in certain regions. In general, you can buy and use either device, no matter where you live, through third-party sellers and websites like eBay and Amazon, but just make sure you note the model number. The regular A52 has model numbers that include A525, and the A52 5G has model numbers consisting of A526. So when you're browsing different listings online, you want to make sure you look for those differences in the model numbers to ensure you're getting the right phone. And obviously, like I said, the A52 5G is explicitly called that as well. 5G is in the name, and you should most likely see that in the listing. Price-wise, the regular A52 is going to be the less expensive device by comparison, pretty much everywhere you look. Prices vary here quite a bit, but right now, I've seen the A52 as low as $325 on Amazon, but it's usually about a $350 device. The A52 5G is sold for $499 unlocked, and I haven't yet seen it discounted too much, but through various carrier deals, depending on your situation, you might be able to snag a discount. Overall, the A52 5G is some $100 to $150 more expensive right now, so keep that in mind. And if you're interested in doing some comparison shopping of your own, I'll leave some links down below in the video description to all the deals and discounts. Beyond the difference in pricing and slightly different model numbers, if you had these two A52s in your hand, you actually wouldn't be able to tell them apart physically. They are 100% identical in every way, from their size to their design to the materials. They come in the same color options to they are the exact same phones, on the surface at least. And I mention this only because last year, some A-series phones, like the A71 and A71 5G, did actually differ a little in dimensions and materials. But this time around, Samsung just used the exact same everything. So you get no advantage or disadvantage one way or another with the devices physically. And cases and accessories, for example, will work with either device, no matter how they're marked or sold. And in one sense, that's great. Both phones have all the same great physical features that you'd want. There's a headphone jack on each, expandable storage, stereo speakers, polished metal housing for a premium vibe. Samsung didn't skip out on anything here with the regular A52, but at the same time, I guess you could argue that there's no real advantage yet in going with the A52 5G, even though you are paying quite a bit more. Even things like the camera setups, those are the same. The fingerprint sensor and unlock setup is identical. The features and software experience on the phones are all the same. Really, like 95% of these phones from the outside, and I guess on paper too with a lot of the specs, it's all exactly the same at this point. So we know that you can't tell these two phones apart at all just by glancing at them. Now let's actually talk about the things that are different, and it really comes down to three specific things. 5G support, obviously, some of the internal specs, and the displays. Obviously, the first big difference in getting the A52 5G is that it's a 5G capable phone. So if it's on a 5G capable network and 5G is available in your area, then you're good to go. You'll likely be getting those 5G speeds. The regular A52 is just a standard 4G LTE device, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I still think we're a little ways away from universally good and available 5G coverage, at least here in the US. So you aren't exactly missing much, but for folks who live in an area where 5G is available and you can get it on your carrier, you can sort of future-proof yourself with the A52 5G. So that's the first thing to consider. In my opinion, it's not necessarily a huge deal, but depending on your circumstances, it's at least something to think about. The second difference that exists between these two phones is with the display, though this is a bit less obvious. Spec-wise, they actually have nearly identical panels. They're both 6.5-inch 1080 resolution screens, 2400 by 1080, 407 pixels per inch, a 20:9 aspect ratio, all covered in Gorilla Glass 5. And side by side, at least in my opinion, there's no real difference in color, clarity, or the overall viewing experience. You can't really tell them apart. The difference isn't in screen quality, but actually in the refresh rate. The regular A52 gets a 90Hz display, while the A52 5G has a 120Hz screen. I think having a high refresh rate panel on both of these phones is a great choice, but the difference in the refresh rate means that the A52 5G is just a little faster, a little snappier, and a little more responsive overall. This is one of those things where the difference between 60Hz and 90Hz, for example, I think is very much worthwhile. But the difference between 90Hz and 120Hz is a little less noticeable unless you really kind of look close and analyze it. Obviously, a 120Hz display on its own is basically a flagship caliper spec, and getting it on an A-series phone in particular is a great deal. But I think most people will still appreciate the 90Hz setup on the regular A52 anyway. So again, this is a difference where it might be a deciding factor for a very small percentage of people, but I don't necessarily think a vast majority of folks would notice or even care. The final actual difference between these two phones is all in the spec sheet, processor, and the RAM options that power the devices. And depending on what you actually use your phone for, this once again may or may not be important or valuable. Inside, the regular A52 gets the very respectable Snapdragon 720G chipset paired with either 4, 6, or 8 gigs of RAM, depending on how you configure it. The A52 5G, on the other hand, has the newer, faster Snapdragon 750G 5G chipset with either 6 or 8 gigs of RAM as well. And to outline the real-world differences between those specs, I first want to show you the Geekbench scores, so you can get sort of a numerical value for comparison. The A52 5G clocks in some 15 or 20% better than the regular A52, which is expected. That's looking at mainly the two different processors more than anything else. And for the purposes of this side-by-side test here in a second, I also want to note that the regular A52 has 6 gigs of RAM, the A52 5G has 8 gigs, so that's another thing to consider. Now, in a side-by-side test with just your average everyday default apps, I'm not really sure you'll see too much of a difference. The A52 5G from time to time will launch and load things a fraction of a second faster, but the difference is not going to drastically impact how you use the phone. Even a lot of third-party apps don't really yield that much of a difference. Performance-wise, the phones are almost identical. And this is one of those things where if maybe you didn't necessarily know that the phones had different processors inside, you might not even be able to recognize much of a discrepancy. What's also sort of interesting is that between 6 gigs of RAM and 8, there's not too much of a difference here either. From time to time, the regular A52 might take an extra half second to get back into an app that was previously loaded, but I didn't really come across any instances where something needed to be refreshed entirely or that there was any blips in app switching. I've said in a few videos now actually that as you start to add more and more RAM, the difference is less and less significant. From 4 to 6, I think it's worth it, but from 6 to 8, it isn't as big of a deal. And having 12 or 16 gigs of RAM in a phone really isn't going to get you that much better performance compared to what you're actually paying for. Also, obviously, you can configure either one of these phones with 6 or 8 gigs of RAM as well, so it's not really a difference that you have no control over. With more graphics heavy stuff, I think you'll experience more of an actual difference overall between the two phones, specifically when it comes to actually launching the apps and loading into the games. Obviously, the load times are going to be extended here, so you can see an actual difference, even if it is still only a second or two. But in-game performance, I don't think is affected at all with the A52's technically less powerful chipset. I don't think there's any difference in how these apps play, how the games run, so you can be be assured that you won't be at any disadvantage with the regular A52 compared to the A52 5G. All in all, while we can pick apart the specs and processor speeds and all that, in real-world use, I just don't think there's so much of a difference that would yield a definitive reason to choose one phone over another. In fact, I don't necessarily think that any one of the just 3 real differences between the A52 and A52 5G, the 5G support, display refresh rate, and internal specs, are any reason at all to choose one over another. Really, to me, what it comes down to is just price. The regular A52 is significantly less expensive in a lot of regions, and you don't really sacrifice much at all. Certainly nothing major, and in fact you get most of the same phone, actually. All the important stuff is the same. So if you have the chance, sure, just get the regular A52. You're not really gonna miss much at all, if anything. At the same time, the A52 5G is sort of the complete package. It does have everything and then some that even a flagship phone might have, so that's awesome. The thing that bugs me most really is just that while I understand region and network specifics that affect how these two phones are offered and sold in certain parts of the world, there wasn't any real difference to have some of those other minor differences between the two phones, like the screen difference. It just sort of adds to the confusion overall of the A series. But hopefully this comparison helps you out now and you'll be a little more informed about these two phones. But what do you guys think? Is there any reason at all to go with one device over another here? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, of course. But hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. Be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys later.